And so it has been in the last half century that U.S. leaders, I don't say the United States, and I don't say we. We go and we do this and we go do that. I said, we? Wait a minute. We pay the taxes. We get screwed over. We get drafted to go, or we have to go in the army. And it's they who do this. U.S. leaders have intervened directly with force and violence. The terror bombing of El Chirrio neighborhoods in Panama City. How many people have heard about it? Not that much, because the media didn't really give it the kind of play that you would get. 3,000 people killed there in Panama City when George I invaded Panama. The 2 million people who have died in Angola with the CIA-supported UNITA, war of attrition against Angola. The almost 1 million who have died in Mozambique, again with these terror squads called Renamo, is the headline, the abbreviated title. It's not an acronym really. And again, supported by U.S. forces. The 1 million people who were killed in the military coup in Indonesia, which overthrew Sukarno, a military that was trained, equipped, advised, and whose salaries were even paid by the CIA and the U.S. State Department and such. So there have been these acts of mass murder. Now, the American people know very little of that. Very little of that gets even reported. The Indonesian massacre, in fact, wasn't even reported until several months later, and it got a box like this in Time magazine, and one story in the New York Times with an editorial applauding the military and saying that's very good, that's a stabilizing thing. And in Nicaragua, the Contra U.S.-backed troops who went in there and hit what they call soft targets, which were farming cooperatives, schools, community houses, granaries, energy stations, housing projects, just hit them and killing people and terrorizing, spreading terror and disillusion, disabling and destabilizing these countries. Rios Montt. Now this is, by the way, what I'm telling you is all a matter of public record. Rios Montt in Guatemala, who went with the Guatemalan army, that maddened, insane murder machine called the Guatemalan army, and President Clinton last year, you remember, 2 years ago, even went and apologized to Guatemala and said, we're sorry for our role when Rios Montt went in there and wiped out 600 Mayan villages, 600 of them, 200,000 people, men, women, and children, killed every single one of them in sight. And Clinton actually apologized and said, I feel your pain, I'm sorry. He didn't explain why was the U.S. supporting this thug and this terrorizer and this murderer. Why are we hated throughout the Middle East after we bombed Somalia and killed 10,000 people with a military intervention? Compliments of George I and Clinton who continued it. Why are we hated throughout Latin America? It's not just the Middle East. You can go through Latin America, you can go through other parts of the world, Pacific Basin, and you'll find people who will see the United States as intervening everywhere. Intervening either directly with their own troops, as in Grenada, Panama, Somalia, Iraq, Yugoslavia. I was in Yugoslavia in the summer of 1999. After Clinton's 76 days of bombing around the clock. You want to talk about terror? You could see it. But with carpet bombing, with knocking out bridges in the Danube River, depleted uranium in the Danube River, which is a source of drinking water for millions of people. The cancer cases. The next year I went to Iraq and I saw children with cancer. They said the leukemia rate among children has just skyrocketed, especially in southern Iraq around Basra and there. And to see these kids in these hospitals is one of the most heartbreaking things. From the terror bombing of U.S. and NATO forces in Iraq, spreading out that depleted uranium and everything else. They said we never had a high cancer rate in this country until that happened. All of that is terror. And so, but you see, our media doesn't tell us that. Our media tells us that we are an innocent nation. We are an American nation who has been holding out a helping hand to people all over the world. And now these forces of evil hate us. They hate us because we love freedom. Well, I think the people are rather innocent. I think they're innocent of what their leaders do in their name. And I think maybe it's time that we wake up, because the first condition of a democratic citizenry is to have a critical view of what's going on. I remember during the Gulf War, a student saying to me, well, this is the difference between you and me. Yeah, it's not very pretty what's happening there. They are destroying a lot of things. But I have my faith in President Bush. I place my faith in President Bush. That was the first Bush. Bush the first. George the first he was talking about. And he said, I trust President Bush. I said, what do you mean you have your faith? You have faith in President Bush? Faith? What are we doing? Religion here or politics? You have faith the way my Italian grandma had faith in St. Anthony. She used to go, oh my God. You go, oh, Georgie Bush, God bless. You light a candle to him? Or what are you talking about? Faith. What do you mean you trust? Trust, which is something where you put your interest in someone else's hands, something you do only with very close friends and loved ones. And even them, check them out once in a while, right? That's what trust is about. But democracy is about distrust. Democracy is about accountability. Democracy is about exposure. It's about political competition. It's about debate. It's about showing us what are the reasons you're doing this. What are the reasons you want another 20 billion for this, another 20 billion for that? What are the reasons you want to tax us even more and tax us even more? For what? What are the reasons you want to send American boys and girls now over to this country or that country or the other country? What's the reason that we have 350 military bases all over the world? Why do we have our fleet making port in about 40 different countries? Why are we militarizing outer space now with new forms of weaponry we hope which will be able to attack and immobilize whole populations? With new electromagnetic weapons and all this sort of thing. Why are they doing it? Why are we training and supplying and financing the troops and the paramilitaries and the police of scores and scores of other nations? Is it because to guard them from attacking each other? No, El Salvador wasn't going to invade Guatemala. Guatemala wasn't going to invade Nicaragua. Nicaragua wasn't going to invade Honduras. No, it was to arm them to the teeth to keep their own people under the heel of those client state rulers. Well, why would we do that? Why are those U.S. leaders doing that? I would argue that it's not, as they say, to protect democracy in these countries. In some cases, they overthrew democracies. I already gave you an example. In Chile, in 1973. In Guatemala, in 1954. In Haiti, under Father Aristide. Death squads killing Haitians. A popular movement. The people mobilizing themselves for something better. That's not what U.S. policy is about. Because George Bush and his friends and Bill Clinton and his friends do not represent the interests of the American people. They represent the interests of the transnational corporations. Their goal is to make the world safe for the Fortune 500. To prevent competing forms of political economic governance. That prevent countries or movements or organizations develop that say, we want to use the land and the labor and the capital and the natural resources of our country for our collective development, for ourselves. And we don't want to leave this open and leave it as just so much raw material for you guys to come in, take as you want, your agribusiness firms, your banks, your investors, your whatever else. Well, that really is what it is about, I would say. Because you can look and you can see there are dictators. And the U.S. opposes some of them, but also loves others. When Fidel Castro took over in Cuba and formed what he thought was a popular dictatorship, he was asked, do you have freedom of the press? He said, no, we don't really. You're not free in Cuba to preach capitalism, racism, sexism, or imperialism, or those things. We do have a controlled press. Why don't you have our capitalist point of view in here in Cuba? He said, well, we get all your stations from Miami anyway, but we'll be happy to put your viewpoint on our official television when you would make time and put our viewpoint on your television. Well, we can't do that because we have a free and independent press. Right. Okay, so we are told that we must oppose Cuba because Fidel Castro is a dictator. But wait a minute. Before Fidel Castro took power in 1959, there had been 20 years of rule by a dictator. His name was Batista. Batista was a butcher. He was hated by the Cuban people. And the U.S. loved him, kissed him, hugged him, made nice with him, sent him aid, trained his Guardia Civil and all this sort of thing. What's the difference? What was the difference between Batista and Castro? The difference was that Batista was a cooperative dictator. What does that mean? It means that he opened up his country to U.S. interests. He says, come on in, boys. The tobacco industry here, the best in the world, right? Cuban tobacco, Cuban cigars. It's yours. The cotton industry, the sugar industry, the magnesium, the mining, the shell food, the tourist industry, big one, all yours. You guys come on in. You own it all, Yankees. You can have it. You can profit. And I keep my people down so that they work hard for less. And the less you have to pay them, the more there is for you. And all you got to do, though, is take care of me, my family, my brother Juan, my brother Jose, my cousin this and that. You give me my boodle. You train my police and paramilitary, and we'll take care of everything for you. And so it was a client-state relationship.